You are listening to the North American Kings podcast, your traditional masculinity training ground. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, founder of North American Kings LLC, a leadership development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio. As we all know, the man brand has taken an absolute beating over the past few decades, and it's our mission to change that. We're going to do that by helping you join the fight to reclaim traditional masculine values. Welcome to headquarters. Training starts now. Welcome back to the training ground, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. After our slight detour last episode, we're going to get back on track with debunking some of the common lies that you're being fed about masculinity and manhood. These lies, as always, are destructive to you and to the people around us. Remember, the reason I'm bothering with any of this is because of the basic laws of mathematics. If we increase the number of masculine men in the world, the happier and more constructive those men will be as citizens. We've discussed before how we always have an impact on those we interact with. Strong men have a much stronger and more uplifting impact on the people that they interact with versus feminized men. Now, I don't say weak men, particularly in the physical sense, but feminized men. Ideally, masculine men have stronger impacts on those around them, and through the principles of multiplication, we can create a ripple effect over and over and over again that will be a net positive to everyone. The lies about masculinity that you've been forced to endure throughout the day or week, and believe me, I stop there because men hear these things at minimum once a week. Those lies hinder or even stop this process from happening. My mission is to crush that and to fortify you against these things. Now, the big things that you're being sold that are in the news and in the media sphere every day are threefold. You might be surprised by some of these, particularly coming from me. Right now, the first and most important is that you must be a raving individual in order to be happy and fulfilled. The truth is, in fact, the opposite. Conformity can, in fact, balance with individuality and is functionally better for you. And we'll go into how and why. The second, restraint is a detriment to your well-being. That's patently false. And thirdly, you don't need to be responsible for yourself. We've discussed this at length, but we're going to go into some practical examples today. But before we do, we want to pay our respects to our sponsors, Naked Armor Razors and Wet Shaved Gear, particularly to launch us today. These guys don't want you to be another big hygiene lemming, lining up at the store for your monthly ration of disposable razors. These folks are craftsmen, one and all, and they want you to be free of anyone's material leash on you. Buy their handle, use their expensive disposable blades. Not anymore. Be free to enjoy the highest quality shave you'll ever give yourself, and do it with our 15% off discount code KINGS15 when you get anything in their online store. Go to nakedarmorrazors.com to get started. That's nakedarmorrazors.com to get your wet shave gear supply today. Now, the first big lie we'll tackle today is that conformity is itself a bad thing. Another word might be assimilation, the joining, the melding into the social and peer groups around you. Everything you hear out there today is geared towards getting people to express and fortify their individuality. Now, let's clarify. Individuality isn't a bad thing. But right now, it's being pitched as this sacred something. Like it's something to be guarded at the cost of relationships, your opportunities, and unbeknownst to most people, it's also at the cost of your potential. We are being slowly persuaded to believe that two truths can't happen at the same time. In the national dialogue right now, as I mentioned during our last episode, we're being told that you can't support a vaccine and refuse to take it at the same time. Now, Anyone who's disconnected from things can surely see that these two things can, in fact, exist at the same time. They are not mutually exclusive. Some things are. Now, Orwell described this as doublethink, and it requires you to hold two conflicting thoughts at the same time. Here's the problem. You can, but it requires so much effort and a willful disregard for logic that it's never beneficial to the individual. You can, in fact, support and conform to a local culture and political discord without losing yourself to the hive mind. I learned this the hard way. Believe me, I am telling you this from experience in the wrong sense, and I will be steering my children into conformity in the right ways. You may be thinking, Glenn talks about freedom and personal responsibility a lot. Like, how can he be asking us to conform? To clarify, I want us to accept a certain amount of conformity in an effort to unleash our potential. Conformity, according to Merriam-Webster's, is the act of giving the same shape, outline, or to contour to. In other words, it's to bring into harmony or accord. To do this to ourselves is assimilation. Now, I did not do this when I was a kid. I didn't do it well, right? My family was very nomadic in the American sense. Since I was 7, I've moved every 2 or 3 years. And I'm not talking like little moves like across town. I'm talking states and cultures away from each other, from place to place. I held on to my individuality by reflex, particularly after the first move. Think about it. I just lost everything. My community, the local culture, my relationships. I responded by pulling in a bit. And that's natural. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. Most people do that, again, by reflex. I grew up in New York, and now like upstate New York, like not like big city New York. And I was an avid Yankee fan for years. And we've talked about how sports, it's something else that brings us together. And it bridges social standings, class, political affiliations. It bridges a lot of different things. Now, as a kid, I was woefully blind to this and held on to my own fandom because it was what I was comfortable with. Now, little did I know that it was becoming almost a lightning rod, drawing more attention to me than allowing me at the time to even the ability to assimilate. It highlighted the differences, the things that made me stand out from the crowd rather than letting me kind of melt into it like a nice chocolate fondue, right? You don't want lumps there. You want nice, smooth consistency. Now, what do you do when you're abruptly challenged, either physically or ideologically? You tense, you squeeze, you hold on tighter. In the manufacturing world, this is common, and especially in safety switches. So I used to sell and help design safety circuits electrically. So I'd sell safety equipment and take a piece of machinery, and we'd put sensors everywhere to make sure that people couldn't get in and get hurt. Well, in the manufacturing world, when you are pushed out of position or you trip, like you tense up. So that's why dead man switches on equipment are designed so that you have to hold the trigger into like this middle position, right? So you don't pull it in all the way like you're shooting a gun to make sure that, the detonator doesn't go off. And to let go completely makes everything stop, right? You have to hold it in this middle position because when you trip and fall, actually our response is to squeeze even tighter. Now, if I trip and fall in or around a moving piece of equipment, that's a bad thing. So a traditional dead man switch wouldn't stop the situation. So now if you trip and fall, you squeeze, the machine stops too. It takes focus and effort to hold something in the middle. From a social standpoint, especially from kids, especially when they're new in new environments, they will instinctively hold on to the things that aren't very important, but they feel incredibly important because it's a lifeline to something stable. So I alienated myself because I couldn't drop my team. Okay, like big deal. But it went further. Music, clothing styles, vernacular. Because we continued to move around, I never really caught up because I was resisting the process. And by the time I decided to assimilate, we were moving again. Now, don't get me wrong, I turned out all right, but I am definitely a product of getting this wrong time and time and time again. Now that we're here in the Cincinnati area, I don't want my kids to have to go through that same thing. I want them to become Bengals fans. Think about that. Even though they are the team that was in the last in the league last year. Why? Because all of the kids that they're going to be making friends with will likely be from this area. My kids don't need to have, I don't want them to have to explain that they're a Packer fan because their parents are, and they don't know why. They just do what their parents tell them. Believe me, it is not worth it. Okay? You can sacrifice that very small piece of your individuality for the added value of being part of a local community, accepted, and having some common ground with kids and you could do that without losing who you are. You know, if all that you are consists of mostly of the sports teams that you're fans of, then of course, don't sacrifice that. But I would encourage you to branch out and put your eggs in more than just that basket. The reason for assimilation is that it aids the swift cultivation of new relationships. It's not just sports teams. I mean, I support uniforms in schools. Proponents of uniforms say that it levels the social playing field for all students by taking the materialism of your attire out of the question. Out of the equation. Now, I'm less enthralled by that argument because it just forces kids to focus on the little things that make them unique. And believe me, they will. Remember, I'm not advocating for a complete disregard of one's individuality. In this case, kids will naturally hold on to the very few things that make them individuals, rendering that argument null. Another argument that I find more compelling for someone, especially coming from this standpoint, is that uniforms can unify. Right? That's why they're called uniforms. It's meant for unification. They give people a common experience that they can build relationships off of. They signify to everyone outside of the fold that you were one of them. It creates allies where they wouldn't have existed otherwise. You guys see this in the world of Harry Potter. Let's get out of sports and politics. Harry Potter, they all had the same uniforms, right? They all had robes. They all had the little vests and little suits or whatever they were. But they also had, outside of being in that school, they also had, hey, this is my house. This is your house. This is the other house. So there were little things that brought them together as a school, but also that kept them together, especially in a boarding school situation where they needed to cultivate some sort of familial bond with the other people around them that they were going to be living with for a long time. Right? Fraternity hazing rituals are a prominent thing, particularly at schools with a lot of history. Let's take it to another example. Where I went to college, the Greek letter population was around 1.5%, so not a lot. And with relatively new chapters and organizations on campus, they are much more open to new ideas of how to run things. The anti-hazing movement was alive and well when I joined, and outside of group bonding exercises, there was almost zero hazing to be had at all. And I'll be honest with you, it wasn't a bad experience. It was uplifting. It built me into the guy I am today. But we couldn't even do pledge campus-wide scavenger hunts as tame as that is. As tame as that could have been designed, right? You can make that super chill and still not allowed. Now, ultimately, even after I got in, I argued in favor of hazing once I had a voice and a vote within the organization. The reason for this was twofold. My own class included, there was a rash of guys who initially pledged that seemed to show lack of respect for the organization or for the older members. Now, just starting the pledge process doesn't mean that you get initiated into the brotherhood. There are steps and things that you need to prove. Not just do, but to prove in order to be welcomed into the fold. Hazing at one time was a tool to weed out people who weren't serious about the process. So that's one. Two, hazing also gave everyone a common ancestry. Fraternities build brotherhood in two ways. They take guys who are predisposed to have like values and like minds. Like, we all kind of need to think the same way. Like, we need to have that bond. We need to like each other's common values and common cores. And it puts them through a common process so that at the end of it, you've got guys who think similarly and have a common culture. Now, we've lost that in America a little bit. Some people appreciate our history and some people don't. And you can kind of see things fraying at the edges for those reasons. Another typical example of this is the Special Forces. In Representative Dan Crenshaw's book, Fortitude, he outlines the benefits of going through Hell Week, which is the last hurrah in the Navy SEAL training. That process was designed to test someone both mentally and physically, but it also gives Navy SEALs a common starting point that they can build their relationships out of. No matter how hard the situation was, it's never going to be bad as Hell Week was. Conversely, you run into another guy who's been through that, regardless of anything else that you guys might disagree on everything, but hey, you went through Hell Week, didn't you? Oh yeah, that was awful. Yeah, me too, man. That was awful. There's something to start on. Now, there is a dark side to this notion of conformity and assimilation. When you don't, you may find yourself with few lasting friendships. Friendships require commonality for them to exist. And if you don't have anything in common with someone, you would have zero reason to be around them, period. That's true again, regardless of what others might tell you. Nothing in common means you have no reason to hang out. Now, I was trying to hang out with one of my wife's work friends, and he was doing the honorable thing, and he was trying to engage me because he was good friends with my wife at work, which is generally a problem for me. I don't trust other guys, and neither should you, like anybody who's listening to this. And I appreciated him trying to engage with me, but we had absolutely nothing in common. Like, do you watch this sport? No, dude. That's the one sport I don't watch. Do you like this music? No, I listen to this music. Just like strike after strike with this guy. And as much as it would have benefited his relationship with my wife and smoothed things over between her and I, we couldn't make it happen. But even friends that you make while doing something you're both into, the principle still holds. If you lose that thing, right? If you both play baseball, all of a sudden, you're on the same team, and then all of a sudden you quit the team, and you have nothing else in common, you're going to have very few things to even talk about, much less participate in. Right? And if that thing is lost and there's nothing else for you to hold in common, anticipate those friendships dissolving. And I encourage you to drop them immediately or replace what you lost, because it's going to fizzle in two ways. It's going to be the slow death of a plant, right? I mean, you ever see a plant slowly wither because it doesn't get enough light or you don't water it? It's a slow and ugly process. Or the converse of that is it's going to be an instant realization that the one thing that you agreed upon is now gone, and you're in a pitched argument with a person again, and you're wondering, why do I even talk to this guy? It's sad, but it happens, and it's natural, right? And I talk about business here a lot, and conformity hits in the exact same way. Conformity is just as important when starting a new job as it is with meeting new people. In fact, I'd say it's even more important specifically because your income is now tied to this. You guys know some of my story. I've not excelled at this point in particular. Now, some of that has had to do with the fact that I usually get brought into a company with the sole purpose of changing things up. But sometimes it's a force of habit that you've spent, sometimes it's just me. I spent 30 years building a habit of kind of carving my own way out there. That's a hard mold to crack. And I work on that, and you should too. Whoever tells you that your individuality is something to be upheld at all costs, don't listen to that advice. And if they keep giving you bad advice, I'd recommend that you stop listening to that person altogether. Now, remember this quote from G.K. Chesterton: "Fallacies do not cease to be fallacies because they become fashions." That's from Illustrated London News, April 19th, 1930. So fallacies are becoming the common language of the day. It's not fake news or fact checkers that I'm talking about. Sometimes people will try to shut down opposing thoughts by claiming that the points that are being made are fallacies themselves or somehow cliche. Another common fallacy out there is the little brother of what we were just talking about with regards to conformity. The idea of restraining yourself, applying the virtue of temperance and moderation, isn't something that's widely encouraged these days. Moderation in some instances, but far more often, you'll hear the proliferation of the idea, well, to each their own. And you also hear about academic liberty, especially in the news today, my God. Or the phrase common when I grew up, "I'll try anything once." Right? The motive behind statements like that is to convince you to experience everything, to ignore prudent judgment, and to surrender yourselves to your every desire. You want sex? Go find a stranger. Want to get high? Well, puff, puff, pass. Want to eat an entire cake? Pass me a fork. If it feels good, do it. That quote in and of itself is something to be avoided. We're all old enough to remember when we were told by our parents that bad things often feel great. That's because our parents do love us, and they're actually responsible for ensuring that we make it out of our childhoods intact. In this case, mom and dad, you were right. Young kids thrive where there are boundaries. Now, why would that be? If the do what feels good crowd were in any way correct, we would just let our kids run amok. Actually, I think that some parents in my generation, or the one just prior to mine, have actually adopted this, and we're seeing it play out in real time today. Cities have burned over this. Kids used to be given rules. My kids have plenty. They're incredibly well behaved. Why? Because restraint creates stability. Imagine how chaotic life would be if you did everything you ever thought you wanted to do, like when it happened. I mean, it's crazy how impulsive we can be, right? Especially for kids, because all they are human sponges, and they're soaking up sensory input and experiences, but they need structure to guide that curiosity. Have you guys ever seen a 1-year-old around animals? Like, it's nuts. I mean, imagine them thinking, I feel like punching that stranger's dog. And you, as a parent, you have to squash that, and you got to squash it immediately. Right? I mean, you aren't just teaching your kid a life lesson, you're protecting them from actual physical harm. I've had that happen. That's a true story. Bam! Or at least, whoa. Hey, don't punch that dog, kid. You gentle. Nice, gentle touches. And because kids don't have experience to temper their desires, we provide that for them. We give kids boundaries in order to give them focus. Rules are how we communicate those boundaries. Obedient kids follow rules, and obedient kids are overwhelmingly happier. Why is that? Because they aren't weighed down with the burden of creating protective boundaries for themselves. Imagine how anxious you would feel out in the world without anybody to guide you at the age of 5. And I'm talking, you're just able to string a couple thoughts together and you're starting to process stuff. You can process danger at that age, like 4 to 5. You can see risk. Imagine having to navigate what's going to kill me and what's not without any boundaries at all and no one guiding you. That's got to be crazy anxious. I don't recommend it. Right? But this works, this also works to prove that you love them. All right, now hold on, baby birds, I'll feed you. This proves that to kids, like when they have boundaries, that proves that they have stable proof that someone in this world cares enough to set up those boundaries to protect them. Right? There's a thousand different examples of that. So, but this works for adults as well. In leadership, it's often said that in order to be a leader, you must first learn how to follow. This is teaching obedience, but the reason it's effective is because it's true. Now, learning how to follow as a function of this allows you the opportunity to learn empathy for both the leader and for the people that are actually going to continue to follow. Learning to follow forces you to grapple with what you look for in a leader yourself so that you can model that behavior when you get the opportunity to take the reins. Now, learning how to follow shows you how to function in a restrained environment and still yield outstanding results. For men, marriage is a prime example of this function of restraint. Adults do this all the time. Men choose to join into a covenant that restricts our baser desires. Why would we? Because deep down, we know that it's good for us. Marriage is amazing. You'll hear me say it 1,000 times. You've got a dedicated partner who's heavily invested in your success because that's also their success. Now, we willingly restrict ourselves from a life of increasing solitude and loneliness and following our baser desires for something stable and healthy. And now bachelors at 40 are often alone and they're left with themselves. And if you can occupy your own mind space that long and sustain it for that long, then all the power to you. Do what you want. But that's a lonely existence. I don't recommend it. Now, the restrictions here enable us men to reach our full potential. Find me any example of a male business owner sleeping with his employees that has led to greatness. I know of one guy in particular that he's done that, and his wife quit the second it became public knowledge. Now, I know, and they got married, right? Like, good for him. The one guy to roll the dice. I know of dozens that have led to those businesses dissolving because of lawsuits, fractured work environments, like claims of sexual harassment. Like, just it doesn't end well. Now, adhering to restrictions, especially the restrictions of marriage, they shield us from this. It strips away the distractions, the temptations of the world, and allow us to focus our efforts on things that will benefit you in your marriage. Believe me, my wife restrains the sheer force of my creativity sometimes, often for the better. Great ambition and a lot of know-how can be a dangerous mix if not focused properly. The third thing I want to talk about today is personal responsibility, and it's something that people are actively discouraged from more often than not these days. But this isn't anything new. The victim mentality peddlers used to encourage us to drop responsibility on our own, and it's gotten a little more subtle lately, but it's still very prevalent if you know what to look for. Candidate Andrew Yang proliferated the idea of the universal basic income during his last campaign for the Democratic presidential primary. Please say that 7 times fast, right? Now, several other politicians talked about like relieving student debt and giving all these benefits away. The subtlety of this is quite astounding. They've pivoted the message from you shouldn't be responsible for yourself to let us be responsible for you instead. Now, depending on how you view this, it can be sickening. The problem we're running into is that a large swath of the population, they're actually on board for this, and the others are being coerced into doing so. Now, a major Louisiana health system, Ochsner Health System, is fining employees now $200 a month if they have a spouse that isn't vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. They call it the spousal the spousal COVID vaccine fee. Now, just so you all know, if you're not familiar with the insurance gambit and you haven't been forced to do so, I'll give you a very brief overview. When you work for a company that offers you insurance, you reach a step of adulting that brings things to a head. And I mean to put some emphasis on that. Like, this is the first real like adult decision I had to make, even getting out of college. Now, I say this because this is how my father explained things to me when I was 16. He was coming into open enrollment, which is where you get to select your insurance plan for the following year. And you can only re-up on your and choose different plans for certain things, like having a kid, getting married or divorced, etc. Other than that, you got to wait until open enrollment starts, which is like October. Now, my father handed me the compensation plan sheet, right? At 16, I was 16 years old, and told me to pick a plan that would best fit our family. Now, he warned me. He said, you're going to have to be realistic and estimate how much any of you or your brothers are actually going to see the doctor. That's a morbid truth, right? And I encourage you as men to embrace it. If you're not responsible for others as of yet, take notice. You will have to weigh these risks, and you'll have to weigh how much risk you're willing to carry versus the likelihood that either you or one of your kids gets hurt in some serious way and has to go to the doctor. Every plan comes with a deductible. That's how much cost you'll have to incur before your benefits really kick in. Now, the lower this deductible, the better. Now, the lower the deductible, the higher you'll have to pay per month for that insurance. So it's kind of a balancing act. And my kids don't see the doctor too much, so we've opted for the high deductible plan. It's a low cost every month, and we pay out of pocket until we hit that deductible. Now, once we hit the deductible, healthcare doesn't cost much at all, at least with this plan. Now, recently, the insurance industry has done some things to help itself and to drive behavior. They started by adding like little baseline policies, right? Like they added little stipulations. One thing is incentive-based rates. You do X number of health and wellness checks, which are all free. And then you do these little workshops. And when you do that, you actually reduce your monthly premium. Saves you money, gets you thinking about health. I like that one. It incentivized us being involved in our own health, gave us some information, and we could either do it or not, and that would still yield us, a small benefit. Then, insurance companies decided that they were insuring too many people who weren't with the company, quote unquote. For instance, my insurance at one time was better than the insurance that my wife was offered at her job, and we like to keep things together. In most situations. So we'd like to be on one insurance plan. It keeps things simple. Well, the new policy comes out and it turns out that I'll pay an extra $50 a month to provide my wife insurance if she has insurance available at her job. If she didn't, then no fee. And you have to sign a contract affirming legally whether or not this is indeed true. So these premium penalties started a while ago, but they're driving non-medical behavior now. Right? Then you'll see a smoker's premium. I smoke a cigar here and there, but I'm smoke free, so I don't legally qualify as a smoker. However, that's another $50 a month. But you might say, hey, that's a medical thing that will drive up your healthcare costs eventually. So fair enough. This COVID one, I don't really know. This episode would be found on Rumble because YouTube probably won't allow this to be up for long. But according to the CDC, you can still contract and spread COVID even if full series vaccinations have been had by you. Right? That just came out. So this healthcare company who employs both doctors, nurses, and support staff just denied the science. They're claiming that healthcare costs can hover that to cover folks who are unvaccinated is costing them so much, and they're compensating themselves for this. Now, unfortunately, the vaccine doesn't seem to be helping with the spread. All right, so you're finding some employees and not others, even though it's kind of a moot point. But this is a bit pervasive. It's not directed at the employee who is actually on the front lines dealing with the infected patients. It's directed towards their spouses. It's just another tool in the arsenal of these institutions who are dictating that you comply with their sketchy logic, or else. Now, the healthcare discussions really took place when Obama was president. And I mean, government overreach. It reached an unprecedented peak during the Obama administration. And, Trump did a little bit, but he didn't squash as much as people wanted him to. And you guys know how we feel about Biden. So full disclosure, Obama is the reason that you should stop saying that the slippery slope principle is a fallacy. He goes to show you that it's just a matter of time. I think a few things, I don't like just like a few things about the Affordable Care Act and the parts, and there are parts of it that were just flat out lies. Now, some of my listeners may be too young to remember everything that went down. It sets precedents for this. If you don't comply, we'll just fine you attitude that the government has, specifically when it comes to their power grabs. But it's also like a huge launch point for the current lack of personal responsibility that we're dealing with right now. Rely on the government, not yourself. That's not a mantra I encourage you guys to take up. Now, one good thing that came out of this discussion was a conversation that I was privy to that made a clear distinction with regards to healthcare. For those who say that it's a free trade marketplace, like the normal capitalist economy is, that is patently false. Normally, in a free economy, competition will keep costs down, drive quality up, and encourage innovation. Healthcare isn't the same because we don't shop for healthcare in the same way. If you had a major heart problem or a brain problem, you wouldn't search for all of the qualified doctors and then shoot for the cheapest one. I'm sorry, it does not work that way. All right? You want the best, and in some cases, you need the best. And think of your kids. Do you really want to shop for the lowest cost doctor for your child, particularly one that has like a major ongoing medical thing? The answer should be no. Now, I'm a free market economist guy, but even I call BS. So our healthcare system is the best in the world. It's not perfect. There are flaws, and those things need to be addressed. But it's certainly better than anything you're going to find elsewhere. Now, here's a little secret, and this is where we tie right back into personal responsibility. You can deny healthcare to yourself. Okay? It's called the right to refuse medical treatment, or RRMT. Now, you can find this great legal paper from July 19th by Ronald A. Standler, attorney at law, state of Massachusetts. In it, he goes over your rights as a patient and the protections that you have by law. Now, I ran into this back in 2016 when I was admitted to the hospital for an abnormal heart rhythm issue, right? And it might be a weird scenario that I likely could have sued over. It was wildly that personal situation, but it was something that was like normally just off the charts weird. And I've talked to people about this, but I'm not a sue happy guy. I'm not going to sue a company for something. I think that's what landed us into a lot of problems with regards to personal responsibility. People will legalize and legislate and do all these things that take away your personal responsibility because otherwise you're going to get sued for you being an idiot. You or me. You know what I'm trying to say. Right? But part of this story will wrap all this together. So I like to spin these experiences for you because it's through these experiences that I've learned about the world. So I appreciate you going on this journey with me. So during this hospital stay, I learned firsthand how and why the healthcare market is not a traditional free market. Now, during this hospital stay, where I was told, we're admitting you can't leave, I'm like, I think I could get up and leave if I absolutely wanted to. And I was this close from just bolting, just for the fact that they said I couldn't, right? But I went in and asked for, like, I felt something weird, went in, asked them. A day later, they come in, they call me and say, hey, you got to come back in, right? So I was soliciting their help. So different days, different hospital, like different problems, but during this hospital stay, you're like, if you ever get admitted, understand you're going to have a team of doctors working with you around different shifts and working different days. If you thought it was going to be the same person, that is a very bad misconception. You won't even have the same nurses the entire time. Now, you will interact with the nurses far more often than you do the actual doctors. Okay, now that is an important point that will come up here in a minute. Even more important than that is how these guys interact with you. So a doctor came in, told me such and such, and this thing didn't look quite right. It was like it was a result of some blood thing that came back. So it was just a little off. He said your kidney or your liver, I'll be honest with you, I forget which, could be reacting to all the stuff we've been doing to you. And here's the kicker. He said, it'll probably be fine, but I want to give you an ultrasound just to check. So they're going to ultrasound that particular organ to see if anything's weird, if there's like a little growth on it or something. Even though he just told me it was going to be fine, right? And those ultrasounds cost money. In the very previous sentence, he said it was probably fine. It was going to go away in a little bit, but they needed to get me in like now because there was an opening down in radiology, or they were going to be booked up all the rest of the day, right? They do this when they scam you on the internet, right? You get a fishy email from a almost correct email address, and they say, hey, you got to call us immediately. There's like some crazy stuff going down. We got to handle it. Oh, give us all this confirming information. Oh, yeah, what's your bank account number? It felt very much the same, right? Hey, do this thing you don't necessarily need to do, but it could be really bad. But you got to do it right now because otherwise we're not going to be able to get you in for a few days. Like what do you do? Something you don't have any familiarity with could be wrong. It could be serious or not at all. But they still haven't told you what the deal is with the thing that landed you in the hospital in the first place. And also, you're paying for your time at the hospital. So if you're thinking about staying an extra day, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. It's going to cost you something regardless of your healthcare coverage. What, do you say no? Even knowing all of that, I still got the ultrasound. Even knowing that I could say no, knowing that it's probably going to be fine, I still did it. I was a third shift supervisor at a company, so my sleep schedule was all jacked up because hospitals will still primarily operate on day shift, even though there's always someone there. I didn't have the energy to even argue with this guy, much less say no. But that's your right. You can still say you don't want it, right? I don't want that. Let's wait for the test. I've said that in less stressful circumstances. In other cases, I've applied the problem-solving method to some unknown medical stuff and asked for one test or another. And trust me, if a doctor says no to an idea that you have about yourself that's non-invasive on his or your part, if that guy or that doctor objects to that, you politely tell that guy to go himself. Okay? For every objective reason, that person isn't the doctor for you. Half of your medical experience is going to be about communication. If you don't communicate well with that person, regardless of the credentials, it's not worth your efforts. And I can tell you, I've had experiences where I had a very brilliant doctor who just did not understand what I was concerned with, right? And he wasn't communicating the things that would calm me down, and he wasn't understanding the questions I was asking him. And that relationship devolved very quickly, right? If you have an idea, one that makes sense and isn't harmful, a doctor who doesn't know what's wrong with you should be completely open to those things. Why wouldn't he want your money, right? Especially if you've got it to spare. Now, you've got to own this process yourself. My parents, managing the healthcare of several elderly family members, have managed the process to the point where they've discovered inconsistencies between specialists and discover something very, very wrong with a very, very dear family member of ours. Right? They're not like doctors are discovering things constantly. You got to own this process yourself. As men, this applies to women as well, but remember that it's your body, not theirs. I've switched doctors permanently. I've gotten second opinions just to go back to the first guy. A professional doctor is not going to be offended by that. That's how they learn, according to the guy I went back to. I said, no offense, but you were talking about some crazy stuff. I was going to ask a second opinion if things got weird. So I figured, let's get it done now. And he was like, hey, I get it. That's how I learned. The guy double checks all my work. Great. It could be anything. But more than anything, a doctor should answer your questions. For all the aforementioned reasons, I write down my questions in a notebook and bring that notebook to the doctor's office with me every single time. You do not want to forget something major. Own this process yourself. You got kids? Write down your questions for them. What's the risk for them? What's the, how difficult is this particular thing going to be to manage? You're the parent. You're responsible. They can't care more about you than you do. It's not possible outside of suicide situations. There's a major difference, though, between subjugating yourself to someone with a specific knowledge set and being an informed patient. You owe it to yourself to be the latter. Now, from the law article, the definition of mentally competent is that mentally competent in the context of refusing medical treatment means that the patient can understand the risks and benefits of the proposed treatment, and the patient is able to make an informed choice. Now, the article demonstrates that the courts declared that the right to refuse medical treatment also includes the right to make an unwise or foolish decision. That means no paternalism. It's a beautiful thing. In effect, the healthcare system and doctors as their executors aren't allowed to treat you like a wayward child. If you are an adult, you are an adult responsible for yourself. And this gets back to the principle that defines us as humans, self-determination. Our ability to seek what's best for us to self-govern. Now, knowing all this helped save a friend of mine from an online dating/medical scam. Okay, now, back when online dating was a little new, but it was picking up speed, there were some rules of the road. Now, man, I'm going to throw back the curtain for you just a moment. Women, this is where self-governance and self-determination are your responsibility. You don't want to end up alone or meeting with guys at the whims of your friends, right? They're like, who do your friends hang out with? That's your pool. I met my soulmate particularly because we kept our friends out of it, right? There are ways that you can mitigate the risk when online dating alone. Okay, so here are some safety tips. Keep your information private. Women, you don't need to give out last names. Keep your real names out of your little profile name or your screen name or whatever you want to use. Don't use your real information. Okay? Don't give out your Facebook content or your Facebook account, all of it. Okay? But here's the thing. Restricting your electronic communication can help with all this. Now, here are the juicy things, okay? Ladies, when you're meeting a guy for the first time, when you started dating online, okay? One, and these are the things that my wife told me, and I've confirmed from other sources out there, okay? One, you meet in a public place. The more crowded, the better. Coffee shops are great for this. Guys, if you can't afford to buy her a coffee, she should leave you, okay? You've got other things to worry about. Buy her a cup of coffee, especially when online dating, because those dates stack up quickly and buying steak dinners every week is expensive. Okay, you can weed people out over coffee and then do a follow-up date elsewhere. Hell, start a date late in the afternoon at a coffee place and then pitch going to dinner later if things work out well. Okay, if you're that excited. Second rule, ladies, tell your friends where you're going. Moreover, tell them what time you're going to be there, the guy's name, and how long you think you're going to stay. Now, this leads to a follow-up. Have a check-in with a friend. Be sure to do this over the phone while you're in like a bathroom or something like that. One of my wife's friends wanted the two of us to actually swing by a restaurant that she was on a date at. And turns out it was a mostly empty restaurant, and my wife is about as subtle as a wolf in a sheep pasture. Okay, the guy caught on right away, and for some reason, he thought that I was competition of some sort. That didn't lead to date number 2. Okay, and for all of his stuff, good for him. Not that she was a bad girl or anything like that, but if guys get red flags, bail. Okay, Rule 3, ladies, don't go back to the guy's place until you know him a bit better. Okay? Now, I'm going to continue to keep pushing things, being locked up until you're in a committed relationship, if not marriage. But this safety rule is also the point. You do not want to get into a potentially dangerous waters without figuring this part out. Okay? Rule number 4, also this, to this end, ladies, drive yourself. Okay? Don't have a guy pick you up or to meet you, meet him somewhere, especially if you don't know him already. Now, if you decide to go into a second location, this also allows you to control your own movement, and this will help you maintain some relative sobriety. And that's a tip in and of itself, but if you've got to drive yourself, you have to maintain some responsibility for your alcohol consumption, which will keep you in the right frame of mind if there is something weird going on. Now, lastly, rule number 5, don't let them handle your drinks without you watching. All right? Now, I've seen products that they'll sell you where girls will pour a little something in their own drink and it'll turn a vibrant color if it's been tampered with. I've also seen like the color changing nail polish that does the same thing. Both of these options are creepy to the guy and should scare him away whether or not he's done anything wrong. But a safe bet is don't let him handle your drinks. Carry it from the top so nothing can get dropped in past your drink, and drink it from a cocktail straw or drink from bottles, right? So those are some online safety tips that women should adhere to, and men, you do not get in the way of these, okay? You should be just as invested in their safety as they are, right? Again, you can't care more about their safety than they do, but certainly you can get out of the way and be cool if you kind of understand that you're being checked on. All right? So back to my friend's thing. Here's the scam. My friend asked me to go to an early dinner with her to talk about something personal. I'm like, all right, what's the harm? We go. She starts telling me about this guy. He's much hotter than she is. He's got a kid. He's nice. He's sweet. They've talked a lot. They get along. She continues to talk about this guy, and I'm listening. I'm like, I'm waiting for the but. Now, it turns out he's overseas right now. He's in England on work, and he brought his daughter with him, okay? Now, that morning, he said that they got into kind of like a bad spot, and the daughter catches a stray bullet and is in the hospital. Sounds a little weird, right? The hospital's demanding money before they'll treat the little girl who's been shot, okay? Let that sink in. Remember, know your medical processes wherever you are. A good doctor is never going to demand payment first before treating a life-threatening illness like this. Even the timing of this didn't smell right. So my friend asked me if she should send him the money to get his daughter's procedure done. And I'm like, I'm open-minded, right? It didn't smell right, but I'm going to ask some questions. I asked how long they've been together, if things are serious. I hadn't heard about him yet, but who knows? But she let slip that she hadn't actually met him before, like in person. That's when I was out, right? Like Shark Tank, I'm done. And the reason for that, like first point's already been made. That gets taken care of after the treatment. Especially in Western culture. It's not like he was, I only say that because I don't know what the Eastern systems are like. Right, but the second, asking for thousands of dollars from someone that you've not met in person is already kind of a crazy idea. Right? Remember, this is before webcams were really, widespread. Smartphones beyond BlackBerries, if anybody remembers those, were just coming out, and Skype and Facebook didn't exist. Or not Facebook, FaceTime didn't exist. I'm sorry, but Messenger certainly didn't exist. So the things that we use to video communicate were not prolific. Now, I propose that she say that she can't get him the money and see how he responded. Now, I told her it was most likely a scam, but I didn't want to crush her spirits in case for some reason it was, a real thing. Now, I told her in no uncertain terms that she was not wrong for having doubts about this. Sure enough, this dude lost his mind. He said some very nasty things. He got angry, lost his cool, and he cut off communication. Then a couple days later, he texts her and says that his daughter has now died because she didn't get the treatment. But this snake wasn't done yet. He then asked for less money to bury her over there. Like, the whole thing was a mess. Now, on top of this, don't ever think that these guys aren't persistent. Not 1 month later, same dude is trying to talk to the same friend of mine with a slightly different picture, like several slightly different pictures on a new profile with a new name. And she was insulted by the fact that he obviously thought she was too dumb to realize it was the same guy. Otherwise, I mean, it could have been the fact that she was just another mark and he forgot who she was. That this brings me to the big point. If you're going to date people online, which is far more popular today than it ever was when I was dating. Firstly, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, keep your online interactions with people you're communicating with to an absolute minimum. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, this affects both your safety and will actually enhance the dating process. Now, follow me on this. 1, if you spend too much time communicating with someone online, you can desensitize yourself to the actual experience. Okay, this isn't a sexual thing, but rather a relationship building thing. You are communicating actual thoughts in history. As you text, as you message, you're doing all these electronic communications. Like, as these things are happening, you're building an experience. Okay, you only do that once in the beginning of a relationship. If you go through all of the first date material via text, via chat, email, you lose the opportunity to get a genuine reaction from these people. You also lose the opportunity to get all that experience from them that you would have gotten firsthand. There's real bonding that happens early, and it requires all that sensory exposure, not just the way you interpret their words as you see them over a screen. You can't get those first moments back, especially if they're wasted over a text message. The second thing, same subject matter. If you stay in online or electronic communication for too long, you're unconsciously building an avatar of this person in your head. Great, making first impressions. However, the longer you spend doing this, the farther away you will inevitably get from the actual reality of the person. This phenomenon has a street name, courtesy of Urban Dictionary. It's called the avatar syndrome. Like, what a shocker, right? It stipulates that, it's a condition in which a personal attraction is formed to the avatar of a person, often digital, rather than the real physical traits. Okay? Now, I'm going to tweak this a little bit, and we're going to add on the psychological traits, their character, too. I've had this happen. I used dating sites way back in the day, and I used a popular one. I met a girl. We started talking, and we got along great, right? Turns out she must have gained at least 60 pounds from the time she took her profile picture to the time we met. Like, imagine getting through that with a straight face and not being rude, right? On top of that, she went ahead and got like a buffalo chicken wrap during the experience. Now, I hate buffalo sauce. So not only was she much bigger than I originally signed up for, but now she smells like something I can't stand. Now, ladies and gentlemen, go easy on the pungent foods during the first few dates. Hell, there's a girl that I have a permanent familial connection to right now who doesn't know that the first time we ever went out, she smelled like a bottle of mustard. Her nickname now is Mustard Girl, and she's left forever wondering why we didn't have a second date. I couldn't get the taste of mustard out of my mouth. Like, I could, even seeing her years later, I can still taste it. It's petty, yeah, maybe, but it's still real. But let's take this avatar syndrome a bit further. I've explained this a few times, in the days when Urban Dictionary is primarily used for searching weird sex things that you heard about from Canada. Now, on a slightly more serious note, when we communicate too much online, we aren't really getting to know that person. Now, when the first date comes, you must bridge the gap between the person you're actually meeting and the person that you think you've been talking to. And if those two things don't eventually meet, or if the farther apart those two perceptions are at the end of the date, will ultimately determine whether or not you get a second date or not. Easy fix, don't spend too much time talking electronically. Even talking over the phone is preferable. You're getting more and more sensory input the more real time the communication is. Now, I've had this rule after I discovered this phenomenon. Again, I discovered these things, in real time, and I decided to actively change it. I took responsibility for myself. I understood what was happening, and I looked at things objectively and changed a few things out. I changed the rules, and I found my soulmate. Now, one text, not a thread, but in one text message and one phone call between exchanging contact information and the first date. That was the rule, okay? Meet someone online, first message, you get one text, one phone call. That's it. And if it didn't work, there'd have to be a solid reason. You know why? The restricting of the communication to a minimum before the first physical encounter, that was the goal. Now, here's the suggestion. It's not going to be for everybody, but pay for the online dating service that you're using. Okay, 1, they're serious. 2, immediately that they can at least afford it and that they're prioritizing this experience. Now, 3, this ultimately, it does eliminate people who are unemployed, especially dudes. Ladies, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, well, I met this guy on such and such a free app, and I'm not going to mention it for legal reasons, but I met this guy on this app, and he's great. He doesn't have a job, so, we meet when I can, and it never ends well. All right? Case in point, free plug, I met my wife on Match.com, so all 3 of my children are Match.com babies. So thank you, Match.com, for the life that you have given me. I really appreciate it. Now, I met my wife on Match. My profile message was pretty straight and to the point. My communication to her was rather cookie cutter at first, with a few fill in the blanks for the stuff that I saw in her profile, detail, that I thought we had in common. Okay? If you can't gather that much information from their profile, walk away. That's not worth it. All right? You're going to rifle through people anyway. Now, the first text was exchanging information. I called my wife while waiting to go to see a movie on my own. I mean, I was alone in a strange city, in a state I didn't have any friends in, and the entire geographic state that I was in. So what else are you going to do on a Friday night alone? So I was waiting to see this movie, call who would be my wife one day. She was on the way to this theme park with her friends, and she invited me to go. I turned down. Why? You make sure that the first date is between the two of you. Okay, you don't want to get her, you don't want to have to get to know her and her friends at the exact same time. Particularly with my wife's friends, because they don't like me much. That's true. The conversation that I had with her, though, went great. It got a few laughs and, got some interest going. Great. I said, I want to meet you this week, coffee, movie, something. Now, the only date that she could book me was Sunday after a wedding. Now, weddings get tricky. People fall in love at weddings. Depending on the crowd, there might be single friends, people who they already know, they have already a common history with. Drinks are flowing. Now, I accepted, but I didn't have much hope. Got to the date, and it was spectacular. Why? Because we both had plenty to talk about. It was all new. Everything was new and exciting. Our reactions to each other were genuine. Also, and I've told you some of the things that I said during our first date. If you guys haven't heard that, go back and listen to a few episodes. Do you think during the what are some of the deal breakers question that, quote, my first son must be named Glenn would have gone over well via text message? Of course not. That's borderline psychotic. That's quirky at best. Experiencing my entire response, the tone at which I gave that answer, body language, thought pattern, eye contact, everything was what made that quirky and funny rather than deranged, right? Only afterwards would I discover that my wife was following her very own playlist. Women have rules for safety. Men, never forget, in most cases, you are the most dangerous thing that a woman will be presented with during the first date. You're an animal. An unrestrained man is a danger. Women court that every time they go out, particularly for the first date. Right? Just the other night, I lifted my wife up over my shoulder and carried her across the room and dropped her on the couch. Why? Just to show her that I could. All right? Take responsibility for yourself. Know the situation around you. Know the impact that that knowledge can give you. Right? Had I not known like the very basics of the medical industry, or the basics of what people do online to scam people out of money, I may very well have led my friend down a very dangerous path. Right? Had I not known some very basic safety stuff, it would have caught on. I would have maybe gotten in the way of some of my wife's very own playlist safety rules. And that, trust me, when you break those rules, that will set off red flags and crash something that ultimately would turn out amazing. Take responsibility for yourself. Do not believe the people who are telling you that you don't need to be responsible for yourself, that restraint in any way is bad for you, and be willing to conform. Do these things in the right way. You're not sacrificing yourself. You're actually enabling yourself to grow in the right way, to take on more and more responsibility to ultimately become a better person, and thusly affect people around you in a far more profound way. That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Glenn Kowalski. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode today. If you guys like this episode, please feel free to subscribe and follow us for free. We're on Apple Podcast, YouTube, hopefully, Rumble, Twitch. We're on everything these days. So jump online, find us, give us a 5-star review. Good luck out there.